The world went quiet. Not silent, but quiet in the way your own heartbeat drowns out everything else. My sister stood there, across the crowded room, talking animatedly, a glass of something sparkling in her hand. And around her neck, catching the low light, was the pendant. My pendant. My grandmother's locket. The intricate gold filigree, the tiny ruby chip nestled in the clasp, the unique, slightly bent link in the chain I knew like my own skin. There was no mistaking it. It hung there, casually, against the collarbone of the one person in the world he should never have given it to. The one person I shared blood with, who knew its history almost as well as I did. My breath hitched. Air refused to enter my lungs. The festive chatter around me faded into a dull roar. All I could see was the glint of gold, the mocking sparkle of the ruby. A cold dread, sharp and immediate, pierced through the thin veneer of forced politeness I'd wrapped myself in for this family gathering. It wasn't possible. He couldn't have. Not that. Not the necklace. He'd promised. He'd sworn, on everything that mattered, that no matter how bad things got, that one sacred thing was safe. That one anchor to my past, to my grandmother, to a love that felt pure and unconditional, would always be mine. But there it was, a betrayal draped in gold and glittering like a cruel joke. My eyes locked onto it, tracing the familiar lines, my mind reeling.
How? Why?
When? The questions hammered against my skull, each one a blow. My hands trembled, my glass feeling suddenly too heavy. I wanted to scream, to run, to claw it from her neck. Instead, I froze, a statue carved from ice and shock, the forced smile melting from my face, revealing the horror beneath. I felt the world tilt, the ground beneath me turning unstable. This wasn't just about an object. This was about a line crossed, a promise shattered, a sacred trust annihilated. And it was happening right in front of me, bold and undeniable. The party noise returned in a rush, a chaotic symphony of laughter and conversation that felt alien and distant. My sister laughed, a bright, carefree sound, completely unaware of the seismic shift happening inside me. The necklace rose and fell with her easy breathing. It belonged there, on her in this moment. And that was the most unbearable part. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe, it helps me more than you know. Life before the deluge, it seems almost idyllic now, filtered through the harsh light of what came after. We had a comfortable life. Not extravagant, but stable. A nice house in the suburbs, decent cars, plans for the future that felt solid, achievable. Mark was charming. He had a way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room. Funny, quick-witted, a little reckless maybe, but I saw it as spontaneity, a zest for life. We built our life together, piece by painstaking piece, and it felt right. It felt like forever. My grandmother's necklace wasn't just jewelry. It was history. It was a tangible link to the woman who had loved me unconditionally, who had taught me strength and resilience, who had smoothed the edges of my difficult childhood with quiet wisdom and endless affection. She wore it every day. The gold was soft from years of wear, polished by the friction against her skin. It smelled faintly of her perfume, a scent I still sometimes catch on a crisp autumn breeze. When she gave it to me, shortly before she passed, her eyes were clear and steady. "This," she said, her voice raspy, "is more than gold. It's a promise. To remember who you are. To stay strong." It's always been for the women in this family who needed its strength the most. I wore it for a while, then decided it was too precious for daily life. I kept it safe, tucked away in a velvet box, bringing it out only for special occasions, feeling its weight, its history, a comforting presence. I showed it to Mark once. He seemed to understand. He said he knew how much it meant to me. He promised he would always protect it, protect us. The first tremor was small. A missed bill. A vague explanation. He said work was tight, cash flow problems. I didn't press. Then another. And another. The explanations became more elaborate, more strained. I started noticing the late nights, the hushed phone calls, the anxiety in his eyes that he tried to mask with forced smiles. The ground didn't just crack, it shattered. It was a Tuesday. I came home to find him sitting at the kitchen table, head in his hands, the air thick with despair.
He wouldn't look at me.
His voice was a low, strangled sound when he finally spoke. "I messed up," he whispered. Understatement of the century. The words that followed were a blur of numbers that didn't seem real. $500,000. Gambling debt. Casinos. Sports betting. A spiral he couldn't control that had consumed him while I was living in blissful ignorance. $500,000. It wasn't a car, it wasn't a mortgage. It was air, vapor, lost on the turn of a card, the bounce of a ball. My world imploded. The comfortable life, the solid future, the trust one had built everything upon, it all crumbled into dust around my feet. $500,000.
It was a mountain.
An insurmountable, terrifying mountain of debt that belonged to him, but that now, somehow, felt like it had landed squarely on my shoulders. The fear was physical, a cold, hard knot in my stomach that would live there for a long, long time. The pressure wasn't just from him. The people he owed, they weren't patient. There were calls, threats veiled at first, then less so. He was terrified, and his terror became my terror. He pleaded, he begged, he swore he'd change, that he'd never do it again, that he just needed a chance, a lifeline. He looked at me with those desperate eyes, the charm replaced by raw fear, and he promised that if I could just help him this one time, he would spend the rest of his life making it up to me. He said we could rebuild stronger.
He said he needed me.
And like an idiot, I believed him. Or maybe I didn't believe him, but the alternative, the threats, the potential for total ruin, the image of his life, our life, disintegrating, was simply too terrifying to contemplate. I felt trapped. Trapped by his choices, trapped by his debt, trapped by the life we had built that was now teetering on the brink. Paying off that kind of debt felt like trying to empty the ocean with a teacup. It wasn't just about writing a check. It was a complete dismantling of our financial lives and ultimately of my life. First, the savings. Gone in an instant. Money I had worked years to accumulate, earmarked for a down payment on a better house, for travel, for retirement.
Poof.
Vanished into the abyss of his reckless choices. Then the assets. The extra car.
Sold.
The small portfolio of stocks I had inherited from my grandfather. Liquidated. Every piece of jewelry I owned, save for my wedding ring, and I thought the necklace. Pawned, sold, turned into cold, hard cash. It felt like peeling off layers of my own skin, each sale a painful tearing away of something I had valued, something that represented security or a memory. It still wasn't enough. Not even close. $500,000 is a staggering amount of money when you don't have it. I took out loans. Maxed out credit cards I swore I'd never touch. Borrowed from my parents, swallowing my pride and facing their worried, disappointed eyes. Each conversation was a humiliation, a confession of failure, not mine, but one I was inextricably tied to. I started working double shifts. Took on freelance projects that drained my energy and consumed my nights and weekends. I barely slept. My days became a blur of work, scraping together every possible dollar and the constant, gnawing anxiety. Every expense felt like a sin. I stopped seeing friends, stopped doing anything that cost money, stopped living really. My entire existence narrowed down to this singular, crushing goal, extinguishing the debt. Mark? He tried.
He got a second job.
He went to Gamblers Anonymous meetings, or so he said. He was apologetic, contrite. But the fear in his eyes never really went away, replaced sometimes by a kind of helpless resentment that I was the one saving him. He promised to contribute, but his earnings from the second job barely covered his own living expenses, let alone made a dent in the mountain. The weight remained mine. The physical toll was immense. I lost weight. My hair felt brittle. Dark circles became a permanent feature under my eyes. But the emotional toll was heavier. The initial shock gave way to a simmering resentment. Every dollar I earned, every sacrifice I made, felt like it was being poured into a black hole created by his irresponsibility. The gratitude he expressed felt hollow, overshadowed by the sheer magnitude of his failure and the burden he had placed upon me. Our relationship became strained. Conversations revolved around money, the debt, his recovery, or lack thereof. The charm was gone. The laughter was gone, replaced by tension, unspoken accusations, and the heavy silence of two people living under an impossible weight. I felt like his rescuer, not his partner. And the resentment grew, a toxic weed in the garden of what was once our life together. There were moments of false hope. A large payment made, the numbers on the spreadsheet. Yes, I had a spreadsheet. I needed to see the progress, to feel like I had some control, finally moving in the right direction. A brief, exhaled breath of relief.
But the mountain was still so high.
The fear lingered, a constant companion. Would he do it again? Was he truly changed? The trust was fractured, possibly beyond repair. I kept working, kept sacrificing, driven by a desperate need to be free of this burden, to regain some semblance of control over my own life. After what felt like an eternity, the impossible happened. The final payment was made. $500,000.
Gone.
Vanquished. The relief was staggering, a wave that washed over me, leaving me weak and trembling. It was over. I had done it. I had sacrificed years of my life, my savings, my peace of mind, but I had cleared the debt. There should have been celebration. There should have been a feeling of shared victory, a renewed sense of hope for the future. But there wasn't. There was just exhaustion. And a profound emptiness. The debt was gone, but the scars remained. The resentment hadn't vanished with the last payment. It had simply settled deeper, becoming a permanent part of the landscape. Mark was relieved, of course. Profusely grateful. He talked about how he could finally start fresh, how he'd prove he was worthy of my sacrifice. He sounded sincere, but something inside me had shifted irrevocably. The person who had plunged headfirst into the abyss to save him was gone, replaced by someone harder, colder, someone who understood, with chilling clarity, the true cost of his recklessness and the depth of my own misguided loyalty. Paying off the debt didn't feel like saving us. It felt like saving myself from drowning alongside him. And the moment the last dollar left my account, a new feeling took root, the urgent need to rebuild my own life, independent of his choices. The focus shifted from saving him to securing my own future. The sacrifice wasn't a joint effort. It was my burden carried alone. And the realization of that solitude, that fundamental disconnect, was the true midpoint shift. The rescue mission was over. Now, it was time for survival, for fortification, for building a life that no one else could crumble. The emptiness lingered. With the immediate crisis of the debt gone, the void it left was filled with the cold reality of our relationship. The forced smiles, the careful avoidance of certain topics, the palpable distance between us. Mark seemed to think that paying off the debt meant everything was magically fixed. He talked about rebuilding, about our future, but his vision still seemed to center around his needs, his recovery, his promises. My sacrifices, my exhaustion, my shattered trust, these were acknowledged with words, but not truly understood or felt. I tried. I really did. I told myself that now, free from the crushing debt, we could focus on healing. But every time I looked at him, I saw not the charming man I married, but the man who had risked everything we had built, everything I was, on a gamble. The man who had placed an unbearable burden on my shoulders and then seemed surprised by the weight of it. And then came the necklace. The party. My sister. The glint of gold. The world tilting. I managed to get through the rest of the evening in a fog. I avoided my sister, avoided Mark. Excused myself early, citing a headache that wasn't entirely false. The moment I was alone in the car, the composure shattered. The tears came, hot and angry, blurring the city lights. It wasn't just sadness, it was rage. A raw, Visceral fury that shook me to the core. He didn't just give away an object. He gave away a piece of me. A piece of my history, my grandmother's legacy. The one thing he knew was irreplaceable, sacred. After everything. After I had bled myself dry, emotionally and financially, to save him from himself. He had taken the one thing I cherished most, the one thing he had promised to protect, and given it away. To my sister. Of all people. When I got home, he was already in bed, asleep. I stood over him, the rage simmering just beneath the surface. I wanted to wake him, to scream, to demand an explanation. But a cold, quiet voice inside me stopped me. What was the point? What explanation could possibly suffice? He had shown me, with brutal clarity, exactly how much he valued me, my history, my sacrifice. He valued it less than what? Why did he give it to her? Was it a gift? A casual gesture? Was she in trouble? The uncertainty was another twist of the knife. I didn't confront him that night. Or the next day. Or the day after that. The anger didn't dissipate. It solidified into something cold and hard. It wasn't just about the necklace anymore. It was about the total disregard. The complete and utter failure to comprehend the magnitude of my sacrifice, the depth of my pain. He hadn't just messed up financially. He was fundamentally broken in a way I couldn't fix. The deepening crisis wasn't the debt. It was the realization that the person I had married, the person I had sacrificed everything for, was a stranger. Someone incapable of understanding the true meaning of value, of trust, of love. The necklace was the symbol, the undeniable proof, that everything I had done had been for someone who didn't see me, who didn't cherish the things I cherished, who was willing to give away the most sacred object I owned after I had just paid off his $500,000 debt. Everything felt lost. The money was gone. The trust was annihilated. The sacred link to my past was dangling around my sister's neck, a symbol of my husband's contemptuous disregard. My life felt like a ruin. The years of struggle, the sleepless nights, the emotional toll, it all culminated in this moment of profound, devastating emptiness. I had saved him, but I had lost myself in the process, and he hadn't even noticed. He had just taken another piece, the most valuable piece, and given it away. Sitting in the ruins of my life, the emptiness was absolute. The money was gone, the trust was gone, and the one tangible link to my grandmother, the one thing I held sacred, was gone too. Handed off like a trinket after I'd saved him from ruin. I looked at Mark, saw the self-pity in his eyes, the casual indifference to the depth of my pain regarding the necklace. When I finally found the strength to ask him about it, his explanation was a mumble about her needing something, a favor. He couldn't remember the details. It wasn't a big deal. It wasn't a big deal? Those words echoed in the cavern of my despair. It was everything. In that moment, something snapped. The despair didn't vanish, but it was overlaid by a cold, hard layer of something new. Something sharp and gleaming. It wasn't just about getting the necklace back anymore. It wasn't even just about the money. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, my future, from the wreckage he had created. It was about showing him and myself and anyone else who doubted exactly what I was capable of. I looked at my spreadsheet, the one showing the $500,000 paid off, the countless hours, the sacrifices quantified in cold numbers. I looked at my empty savings account, my maxed out cards. I looked at my sister's neck in my mind's eye. And the victim died. She died in that moment, replaced by a relentless, calculating survivor. This wasn't karma I was waiting for. This wasn't hoping he'd eventually face consequences. This was a conscious decision to build the consequences. To create a future so vastly different from the one he envisioned, so powerful, so self-sufficient, that his betrayal would shrink into insignificance beside it. And maybe, just maybe, in the process, he would finally understand the magnitude of what he had lost and what he had thrown away. The plan formed slowly at first, a dark seed planted in the fertile ground of my rage and despair. It grew, fueled by sleepless nights and a burning, unwavering focus. I wouldn't confront him. I wouldn't scream or beg or demand the necklace back. Not yet. That would give him power. Instead, I would disappear into my work, into building something undeniable, something that spoke louder than any words. I quit my job. Everyone thought I was crazy. After everything you've been through, you're leaving stability? But stability was a cage built by his debt. I took the remaining scraps of my liquidated assets, a small, pathetic sum, and started my own business. It was something I'd always dreamed of, a vague plan for a distant future. But the future was now. There was no safety net. Failure wasn't an option. It was an abyss. The early days were brutal. I worked 18-hour days, fueled by instant coffee and sheer, unadulterated spite. I learned to do everything myself: sales, marketing, accounting, customer service. I was the CEO, the intern, and the janitor all rolled into one. Every rejection felt like a punch. Every small victory felt monumental. I channeled the anger, the pain, the humiliation into relentless drive. Every obstacle was a reminder of the mountain I had already moved, of the man who thought he could break me. My business was in a complex, rapidly evolving sector. I had an idea, a niche I believed in, but turning it into reality was a constant uphill battle. I pitched investors and was told my idea was too ambitious, that I lacked experience. I heard the word no so many times it became a background hum. Mark was dismissive. He saw my frantic activity as a temporary obsession, a way for me to cope with the aftermath of the debt crisis. He'd make comments like, "Working late again, huh? Don't burn yourself out," with a patronizing tone that suggested he knew this little venture was doomed to fail. He was still focused on his own attempts at rebuilding, which seemed to involve a lot of talking about future plans and very little actual execution. He clearly underestimated the depth of my resolve. He saw the tired woman who paid his debts, not the phoenix rising from the ashes. I didn't share the details of my struggles with him. I became guarded, secretive. My business was mine. It was the one area of my life where his influence was non-existent. It was my sanctuary, my weapon, my proof of life. As the business grew, slowly, painfully, I started building a network. Not the kind of shallow connections Mark relied on, but solid relationships built on mutual respect and shared ambition. I met people who were sharp, driven, who understood the game. I learned from them, adapted, strategized. I became ruthless in my focus. Personal life was non-existent. My world was the business. Building it, protecting it, making it grow. Every deal closed, every new client gained, was a small victory against the man who had tried to erase me. The early months bled into years. The ramen dinners gave way to catered lunches for my growing team. The cramped home office became a sleek downtown space. The frantic uncertainty was replaced by a quiet confidence. My business wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. It was becoming a force. And as its power grew, I felt my own power returning tenfold. I learned to play the game better than he ever could. While he was focused on appearances and empty promises, I was building real value, real connections, real influence. I saw opportunities where he saw obstacles. I made decisions with a cold, clear logic born from the fires of betrayal. The financial world that had once terrified me became my playground. I learned its rules, its loopholes, its hidden pathways. I was no longer the woman scrambling to pay off a $500,000 debt. I was the woman who commanded millions. The real plot twist wasn't just my success. It was how my success began to intersect with and overshadow his world. Mark worked in a related industry, nothing spectacular, just steady. As my company grew, it started doing business with companies he wanted to impress, companies he relied on for his own advancement. My name started coming up in conversations he was a part of. Suddenly, he wasn't the one with the vague promises of future success. I was the one with concrete, undeniable results. His reaction was a mix of disbelief, begrudging admiration, and thinly veiled resentment. He tried to claim some credit initially. I always encouraged her entrepreneurial spirit. I just smiled a cold smile. He didn't encourage it, he necessitated it. Then he tried to lean on my success. Maybe your company could partner with mine? He'd suggest, casually, hoping to ride my coattails. I politely declined, every single time. Conflict of interest, I'd say, or doesn't align with our strategic vision. Each refusal was a small, internal triumph. The true blindsiding came not from a direct confrontation, but from the sheer, overwhelming contrast between our lives. While I was featured in industry magazines, speaking at conferences, closing multi-million-dollar deals, his life remained small, stagnant. His second job had fallen by the wayside. The gambling habits, though maybe not reaching the $500,000 peak again, hadn't disappeared entirely. His charm had faded, replaced by a bitterness he couldn't hide. He was still the man who had nearly ruined us, only now I wasn't standing in the ruins with him. I was building an empire on a different continent. The sister plot twist unfolded quietly. She had seen my struggle. She knew about the debt, though perhaps not the full, brutal details of my sacrifice or the necklace incident. She had also seen the transformation. She saw the articles about my company, saw my name associated with success and power. She saw the woman I had become. She saw the undeniable evidence of what I had built from nothing, from devastation. My empire wasn't just financial, it was a monument to resilience, a testament to overcoming betrayal. She must have contrasted that with Mark. With his excuses, his stagnation, maybe even his casual attitude towards something as precious as the necklace. She saw the depth of his irresponsibility against the backdrop of my relentless, almost impossible, success. It was months, maybe a year, after my company went public, after I had reached a level of financial and professional success that was beyond anything I could have imagined back when I was scraping together dollars to pay off debt. She called me. Her voice was hesitant. She asked if we could meet for coffee. We sat in a quiet corner booth in a cafe far from our usual spots. The conversation was awkward at first, small talk masking the unspoken weight between us. I didn't bring up the necklace. I hadn't mentioned it to her since that terrible night. Then, she reached into her bag. My heart hammered against my ribs. She pulled out a small, worn velvet box. The same one I had kept it in. She placed it on the table between us. I think you should have this back, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She looked tired, maybe guilty. She didn't make excuses for Mark. She didn't offer elaborate apologies. She just looked at me, really looked at me, the woman who had faced down financial ruin and built an empire, and quietly handed back the symbol of his ultimate betrayal. She told me Mark had given it to her years ago. Said he owed her a favor. She'd helped him out of a jam, another jam, of course. He'd just given it to her, like it was just some old piece of jewelry. He hadn't mentioned it was an heirloom, hadn't explained its significance. She said she liked it, wore it occasionally, never knowing the full story until she saw me. The contrast, the sheer scale of what I had endured and what I had built. It put his casual gift into a different, shameful perspective. It made her realize the casualness of his betrayal, not just to me, but to my grandmother's memory. It wasn't just gold, it was the weight of history and sacrifice he had so carelessly discarded. That moment was the climax, not a shouted argument or a dramatic revelation to a crowd. It was quiet, understated, and devastatingly powerful. The small box on the table represented the entire journey. The debt, the sacrifice, the betrayal, the rage, the relentless building, the undeniable success, and finally, the quiet acknowledgement of the truth by the person who had unknowingly held the physical proof of his disregard. I picked up the box. It felt heavy, not just with its own weight, but with the weight of years. The cold gold against my fingertips was strangely familiar, yet alien. It was back. After everything, it was back. The aftermath was swift, clinical. There was no salvaging the marriage. The necklace was the final nail, driven with quiet precision. I filed for divorce. It wasn't a fight for money. I had more than enough. It was a legal formality to sever the ties, to reclaim my name, my future entirely. Mark didn't put up a fight. He couldn't. My financial position was unassailable. My legal team was formidable. He signed the papers, a humbled, defeated man. He hadn't just lost a wife. He had lost access to a world he hadn't appreciated, a world he had actively tried to dismantle through his irresponsibility. He was left with the ruins he had created, while I walked away towards the empire I had built. The necklace sits on my dresser now. I don't wear it. Not yet, maybe not ever. It's still beautiful, the gold soft, the rubies still catching the light. But it's changed. It's no longer just a symbol of my grandmother's love and strength. It's also a symbol of betrayal, of loss, and ultimately, of survival. It's a reminder of the lowest point and the height I reached climbing out of it. My relationship with my sister is complicated. There's an unspoken understanding. She sees the necklace, she knows. There's guilt on her part and a quiet respect. We talk, sometimes. It's not the easy relationship we had before, but maybe, over time, it can become something new, something built on this shared, painful knowledge. Life at the top is solitary. The empire is real, the success undeniable. I have everything I ever wanted in terms of security and achievement. But the journey left its marks. The coldness, the ruthlessness required to build it, didn't just vanish when the goal was achieved. The part of me that was soft, trusting, easily hurt, it's still there, buried deep, protected by layers of armor forged in fire. I am free. Free from debt, free from the weight of someone else's irresponsibility, free from a relationship built on lies and disregard. The future is mine, entirely mine, to shape. It's a vast, open landscape stretching before me, full of possibility, but also a quiet reminder of the cost. The necklace sits there, on the dresser, a small, golden testament to a time when everything was lost and the slow, arduous, necessary process of winning it all back, and then some. It glints in the light, a silent witness to the fire I walked through and the new, harder self that emerged on the other side. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. And thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.